Hello and welcome to the Cave of the Druid. This will be my first video, and for my first video I wanted to start with a creature of Irish legend. In Irish mythology there are many mythical creatures, all of which possess either wonderful and mysterious abilities or terrifying and ominous abilities. The Darrig, also known as Fair Dearg, is one such creature of Irish mythology. Darrig is an Anglophone pronunciation of the Irish words fear and Dearg, meaning red man. The name Red Man is a result of him being described as wearing a red coat as well as a red sugarloaf cap in a similar fashion to the Leprechaun. The Fair Dearg is a solitary fairy, sometimes described as an old man with a long grey beard, but most often described as only standing about 2.5 feet tall, but being able to make himself appear as being much taller. They are also sometimes known as rat boys, as they are said to be rather fat, have dark, hairy skin, long snouts, and skinny tails. When referencing the Fair Dearg's mischievous ways in his 1888 Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry, William Butler Yeats said, "The Darrig, or Fair Dearg, which means the red man, for he wears a red cap and coat, busies himself with practical joking, especially with gruesome joking. This he does and nothing else." According to Gil Hamper, he manipulates his voice, emitting sounds like the thudding waves on the rocks or the cooing of pigeons. His favorite is the dull, hollow laugh of a dead man, which he makes sound as if it's coming from the grave. Mortal terror amuses the Fair Dearg. Occasionally, he invites a mortal to enter a lonely bog hut. Then he orders him to make dinner out of a hag skewered on a spit. The man usually faints. When he recovers, he finds himself alone with the sound of laughter filling the air, but coming from no distinguishable source. It is advisable to say, "Na den mugat fum," do not mock me, when you encounter a Fair Dearg. That way you cannot be used in one of his macabre games. Unfortunately, he plans his tricks so well that a mortal is snared long before he realizes the need to protest. He is also known to be the cause of nightmares. In Catholic World, Volume 79, it is said that he presides over evil dreams. However, the one redeeming trait of the Fair Dearg is that if he so wishes, he is able to release those who have become trapped in the fairy world. In Irish folklore, the fairy creatures lived in a world parallel to ours. Rivers, streams, lakes, or anywhere with water were considered liminal spaces between the fairy world and ours. If you crossed over a stream, there was a chance of ending up in the fairy world. In broader mythology and folklore, places of transition or crossing over, such as bridges or crossroads, were also seen as liminal places where you might cross over into the other world, or otherworldly creatures might cross over into ours. When it comes to fairies, there are also other ways of traveling to the fairy world. In Irish folktales, falling asleep on small hills or rocky outcrops or in abandoned barns would likely lead to fairies appearing and casting their mischief on you, bringing you into the fairy realm. There are many stories of mischievous fairies kidnapping people and taking them away to fairyland. The Fair Dearg could release you once you were in fairyland, but more often he would play cruel jokes on the common folk, like stealing their babies and replacing them with changelings. A changeling, also historically referred to as an oaf or an oaf, is a human-like creature found throughout much of European folklore. A changeling was a substitute left by a supernatural being after kidnapping a human being. Sometimes the changeling was a stalk, a piece of wood made to magically resemble a kidnapped human. More often, the changeling was a supernatural being who had been made to look just like the kidnapped human using magic. Supernatural beings blamed for the stealing of children included fairies, demons, trolls, and nereids, and many others. In Irish legend, a fairy child may appear sickly and will not grow in size like a normal child, and may have notable physical characteristics such as a beard or long teeth. They may also display intelligence far beyond their apparent years and possess uncanny insight. A common way that a changeling could be identified is through displaying unusual behavior when it thinks it is alone, such as jumping about, dancing, or playing an instrument, though this last example is found only within Irish or Scottish legend. Many who study myths and folklore agree that there are different kinds of fairies, some benevolent and others malevolent. Some fairies are known to bestow gifts of supernatural abilities or supernatural artifacts onto those who unknowingly cross over into the fairy realm. This encounter will be very beneficial for the character and lead to them achieving a great feat or winning the love of a maiden whom they desire. However, the malevolent spirits, such as the fair Darrig, will either curse the individual or play a cruel prank on them. Changelings who are left in the place of a child who was kidnapped are only one example of evil spirits playing a gruesome joke on someone. Going back to Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry by William Butler Yeats, there is a story about a terrifying encounter with the fair Dearg written by Miss Letitia McClintock, an Irish writer and folklorist who lived in County Donegal in the 19th century. It goes as follows. Pat Diver the tinker was a man well accustomed to a wandering life and to strange shelters. He had shared the beggar's blanket in smoky cabins. He had crouched beside the still in many a nook and corner where poteen was made. On the wild Inishowen mountains he had even slept on the bare heather, or on the ditch with no roof over him but the vault of heaven. Yet were all the nights of adventure tame and commonplace when compared with one especial night. During the day preceding that night he had mended all the kettles and saucepans in Moville and Greencastle, and was on his way to Culdaff, when night overtook him on a lonely mountain road. He knocked at one door after another, asking for a night's lodging, while he jingled the halfpence in his pocket, but was everywhere refused. Where was the boasted hospitality of Inishowen, which he had never before known to fail? It was of no use to be able to pay when the people seemed so churlish. Thus thinking, he made his way towards a light a little further on, and knocked at another cabin door. An old man and woman were seated, one at each side of the fire. "Will you be pleased to give me a night's lodging, sir?" asked Pat respectfully. "Can you tell a story?" returned the old man. "No then, sir, I canna say I'm good at storytelling," replied the puzzled tinker. "Then ye maun just gang further, for none but them that can tell a story will get in here." This reply was made in so decided a tone that Pat did not attempt to repeat his appeal, but turned away reluctantly to resume his weary journey. "A story indeed," muttered he. "Auld wives' tales to please the weans." As he took up his bundle of tinkering implements, he observed a barn standing rather behind the dwelling house, and aided by the rising moon, he made his way towards it. It was a clean, roomy barn, with a piled-up heap of straw in one corner. Here was a shelter not to be despised, so Pat crept under the straw and was soon asleep. He could not have slept very long when he was awakened by the tramp of feet, and, peeping cautiously through a crevice in his straw covering, he saw 4 immensely tall men entering the barn, dragging a body, which they threw roughly upon the floor. They next lighted a fire in the middle of the barn, and fastened the corpse by the feet with a great rope to a beam in the roof. One of them then began to turn it slowly before the fire. "Come on," said he, addressing a gigantic fellow, the tallest of the 4. "I'm tired. You be to take your turn." "Faix and troth, I'll no turn him," replied the big man. "There's Pat Diver in under the straw. Why wouldn't he take his turn?" With hideous clamor, the 4 men called the wretched Pat, who, seeing there was no escape, thought it was the wisest plan to come forth as he was bidden. "Now, Pat," said they, "you'll turn the corpse, but if you let him burn, you'll be tied up there and roasted in his place." Pat's hair stood on end, and the cold perspiration poured from his forehead, but there was nothing for it but to perform his dreadful task. Seeing him fairly embarked in it, the tall men went away. Soon, however, the flames rose so high as to singe the rope, and the corpse fell with a great thud upon the fire, scattering the ashes and embers, and extracting a howl of anguish from the miserable cook, who rushed to the door and ran for his life. He ran on until he was ready to drop with fatigue, when, seeing a drain overgrown with tall rank grass, he thought he could creep in there and lie hidden till morning. But he was not many minutes in the drain before he heard the heavy tramping again, and the 4 men came up with their burthen, which they laid down on the edge of the drain. "I'm tired," said one to the giant. "It's your turn to carry him a piece now." "Faix and troth, I'll no carry him," replied he. "But there's Pat Diver in the drain. Why wouldn't he come out and take his turn?" "Come out, Pat, come out!" roared all the men, and Pat, almost dead with fright, crept out. He staggered on under the weight of the corpse until he reached Killtown Abbey, a ruin festooned with ivy, where the brown owl hooted all night long, and the forgotten dead slept around the walls under a dense, matted tangles of brambles and benweed. No one ever buried there now, but Pat's tall companions turned into the wild graveyard and began digging a grave. Pat, seeing them thus engaged, thought he might once more try to escape, and climbed up into a hawthorn tree in the fence, hoping to be hidden in the boughs. "I'm tired," said the man who was digging the grave. "Here, take the spade," addressing the big man. "It's your turn." "Faix and troth, it's no my turn," replied he, as before. "There's Pat Diver in the tree. Why wouldn't he come down and take his turn?" Pat came down to take the spade, but just then the cocks in the little farmyard and cabins round the abbey began to crow, and the men looked at one another. "We must go," said they, "and well it is for you, Pat Diver, that the cocks crowed, for if they had not, you would just have been bundled in that grave with the corpse." 2 months passed, and Pat had wandered far and wide over the county Donegal, when he chanced to arrive at Raffawi during a fair. Among the crowd that filled the diamond, he came suddenly on the big man. "How are you, Pat Diver?" said he, bending down to look into the tinker's face. "You have the advantage of me, sir, for I haven't the pleasure of knowing you," faltered Pat. "Do you not know me, Pat? When you go back to Inishowen, you'll have a story to tell." And so concludes the story of the Far Darrig, or the Fair Dearg, the mischievous red man of Irish folklore. I plan on making more videos about mythology and folklore. This is just the first video of many on my channel. So consider subscribing to The Cave of the Druid if you want to watch more. And if you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like. But anyways, thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.